A team of archaeologists at the University of Oregon have found one of North America's oldest human-occupied sites in southern Oregon.
It was preserved under a layer of volcanic ash from Mount St. Helens eruption over 15,000 years ago.
For over a century, the story seemed settled. Textbooks across America taught the same timeline. Museum exhibits displayed the same narrative. Scientists agreed on when humans first arrived in North America, 13,000 years ago, the Clovis people. End of story. But in the high desert of central Oregon, beneath layers of ancient volcanic ash that had sealed the ground for over 15,000 years, something was waiting. Something that would force every archaeologist, every historian, and every scientist to confront an uncomfortable truth. Everything we thought we knew was wrong. In 2011, a team of researchers began excavating a shallow rock shelter just outside the small town of Riley, Oregon. They weren't looking to rewrite history. They expected to find evidence of late Ice Age animals, perhaps some scattered artifacts from the tail end of the glacial period. Standard archaeological work, nothing revolutionary. What they discovered instead was so impossibly old, so far beyond the accepted timeline, that it triggered a crisis in American archaeology.
It looks different because it's not from the area. We're not quite sure where this came from to arrive at this site.
The evidence found at this site, known as Rimrock Draw, doesn't just challenge the existing model of how and when humans arrived in the Americas. It obliterates it completely. This is the story of the oldest confirmed human occupation site in North America, a discovery that pushes back the timeline of human settlement by more than 5,000 years. A find so significant that it's forcing scientists to reconsider everything they believed about the first Americans. The evidence is undeniable. The dates have been confirmed by multiple independent laboratories, and the implications reach far beyond a single archaeological site in Oregon. This is the discovery that changed history, and what it reveals about our ancestors is more remarkable than anyone imagined. The theory that dominated American archaeology. To understand why the Rimrock Draw discovery is so revolutionary, you need to understand the theory it replaced. For most of the 20th century, the Clovis first model wasn't just the leading explanation for how humans reached the Americas. It was treated as established fact. The theory was elegant in its simplicity. Around 13,000 years ago, humans living in Siberia crossed into North America over a land bridge known as Beringia. This wasn't speculation. During the last ice age, so much water was locked up in massive glaciers that sea levels dropped by more than 300 feet. Where the Bering Strait now separates Asia and North America, there was once a wide corridor of dry land stretching for hundreds of miles. According to the Clovis first model, these early migrants crossed Beringia and entered Alaska. But they couldn't move south immediately. Two enormous ice sheets, the Laurentide covering eastern and central North America, and the Cordilleran covering the western mountains, blocked their path. These glaciers were miles thick, utterly impassable barriers of ice. Then, as the climate began to warm around 13,000 years ago, the ice sheets started to retreat. A narrow corridor opened between them, running from Alaska down through modern-day Canada into the continental United States. This ice-free corridor became the highway for human migration. The theory proposed that early Americans, following herds of mammoth, bison, and other large game animals, traveled south through this corridor and rapidly spread across both North and South America. Within just a few centuries, humans had reached from the Arctic to the southern tip of Chile, colonizing two entire continents with remarkable speed. The physical evidence supporting this model seemed overwhelming. Across North America, archaeologists discovered distinctive stone spear points known as Clovis points, named after the town of Clovis, New Mexico, where they were first identified in the 1930s. These artifacts were technological masterpieces, broad, leaf-shaped projectile points with a distinctive fluted channel running partway up both faces. This fluting served a specific purpose. It allowed the stone point to be hafted securely onto a wooden shaft, creating a deadly hunting weapon capable of bringing down the largest Ice Age animals. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, requiring sophisticated stoneworking techniques and an understanding of fracture mechanics. What made these points even more significant was their consistency. From New Mexico to Nova Scotia, from Montana to Florida, Clovis points looked remarkably similar. This suggested a unified culture, a single population that spread rapidly across the continent, carrying the same technology and knowledge with them. Radiocarbon dating anchored this culture firmly in time. Sites like Blackwater Draw in New Mexico and Dent in Colorado consistently produced dates between 13,200 and 12,800 years ago. For decades, as hundreds of Clovis sites were discovered across the United States and into Mexico, the pattern held. Wherever these distinctive points appeared, they seemed to mark the first human presence. The Clovis first model became more than a scientific theory. It became orthodoxy. Graduate students were trained within its framework. Museum exhibits were designed around it. Textbooks presented it as settled science. Any archaeological site claiming to be older than Clovis was met with intense skepticism, often dismissed as contaminated, misdated, or misinterpreted. For most of the 20th century, the model stood unchallenged. But like all scientific theories, it was only as strong as the evidence supporting it, and that evidence was about to crumble. The cracks begin to show. The first serious challenge to Clovis first came not from archaeology, but from geology. Scientists studying the ice-free corridor made a troubling discovery. The corridor didn't open when the theory required it to. According to geological evidence from lake sediments, pollen records, and glacial moraines, the passage between the Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets didn't become viable until roughly 11 to 12,000 years ago. Even more problematic, when it first opened, the corridor was a desolate, lifeless landscape. No vegetation, no animals, no food or water sources. It would have been completely unable to support human migration for centuries after it first appeared. This created a logical impossibility. If Clovis people arrived 13,000 years ago, but the corridor they supposedly used didn't open until after they were already here, how did they get in? The mathematics simply didn't work. The timeline had fractured. Archaeologists began proposing alternative routes. The most compelling was the Kelp Highway hypothesis, which suggested that early humans didn't travel overland at all. Instead, they moved south along the Pacific coast by boat, following a rich marine environment of kelp forests, fish, seals, sea otters, and abundant shellfish. This coastal route would have been accessible even during the height of the Ice Age. While continental ice sheets blocked interior routes, the Pacific coastline remained relatively ice-free. People with boats and maritime skills could have traveled from Asia down the western edge of North America, island hopping and following the shoreline all the way to South America. The theory was plausible, but theories need evidence. And for years, that evidence was frustratingly scarce. Most of the ancient coastline where these early migrants would have traveled is now underwater, submerged by rising sea levels after the Ice Age ended. The archaeological record had been erased by the ocean. But then sites began to surface, sites that couldn't be explained by the Clovis first model. In Pennsylvania, Meadowcroft Rock Shelter produced artifacts from stratigraphic layers dated to at least 16,000 years ago. In Idaho, Cooper's Ferry yielded similar dates, with stone tools and evidence of salmon fishing dating back 16,000 years. In Texas, the Galt site revealed evidence of pre-Clovis occupation. In South Carolina, the Topper site claimed dates exceeding 20,000 years, though these remain controversial. Individually, each site faced intense scrutiny. Critics questioned the dating methods, suggested contamination, pointed to possible disturbances in the sediment layers. The archaeological community remained divided, but collectively, the pattern was undeniable. Evidence was accumulating from sites scattered across North America, all pointing to human presence before the Clovis period. The wall was developing cracks. Then came Rimrock Draw, and the wall didn't just crack, it collapsed. A shallow shelter in the Oregon desert. Rimrock Draw doesn't look like the kind of place where history gets rewritten. It's a modest rock shelter carved into a low volcanic ridge in the high desert of central Oregon, about 30 miles outside the tiny town of Riley. The overhang is shallow, barely deep enough to provide protection from rain or snow. The surrounding landscape is harsh and austere, dominated by sagebrush, scattered juniper trees, and volcanic rock. There are no dramatic cliffs, no sweeping vistas, nothing that would make this location stand out to a casual observer. It's the kind of place you'd drive past without a second glance. But beneath the dusty, unremarkable floor of this shelter lies one of the most important archaeological sites ever discovered in North America. The excavation began in 2011 when archaeologists from the University of Oregon's Museum of Natural and Cultural History decided to investigate the site. They had been conducting surveys of the region, documenting archaeological resources on public lands managed by the Bureau of Land Management. Surface artifacts had been found scattered around the shelter, stone flakes and broken tool fragments that suggested ancient human activity. The team, led by experienced archaeologists trained in modern excavation techniques, approached the site with meticulous care. This wasn't a treasure hunt. It was a scientific investigation where context matters as much as the artifacts themselves. Every layer of sediment was carefully documented. Every artifact was photographed in situ, its exact position recorded in 3 dimensions before it was removed. The excavated soil was sifted through fine mesh screens to ensure that even the smallest bone fragments or stone flakes weren't missed. As they began removing the surface layer, what they discovered was an archaeologist's dream, a perfectly preserved stratigraphic sequence, layer upon layer of sediment stacked in chronological order, undisturbed by erosion, flooding, burrowing animals, or later human activity. This kind of preservation is extraordinarily rare. Most archaeological sites have been disturbed in some way over the thousands of years since they were occupied. Tree roots penetrate deep into the soil, mixing layers. Floods wash sediment around, carrying artifacts from one level to another. Animals burrow, creating tunnels that mix materials of different ages. Later human activity can dig pits or disturb earlier deposits. But at Rimrock Draw, the sediment layers were clean, distinct, and undisturbed. Each layer sat exactly where it had been deposited, creating a readable chronological sequence like pages in a book. This meant that anything found in a deeper layer was genuinely older than material found in layers above it. As the team dug deeper, artifacts began to appear. Stone tools, flakes from tool manufacturing, animal bones, evidence of butchery and food processing. The deeper they went, the older the material became, exactly as the law of superposition predicts. And then, at a depth that corresponded to a much earlier time period than anyone expected, they found something that changed everything. Camel teeth. The camel that shattered the timeline. The discovery of camel remains in an Oregon archaeological site might seem strange to modern eyes. Camels are associated with deserts in Africa and Asia, not the American West. But this reaction reveals a gap in our understanding of North American natural history. Camels actually evolved in North America. For millions of years, they thrived across the continent in numerous species and sizes. During the Ice Age, several camel species roamed North America, including Camelops hesternus, a massive animal that stood nearly 7 feet tall at the shoulder and weighed up to 1,800 pounds. These Ice Age camels were larger and more robust than their modern relatives in the Middle East and North Africa. They were built for cold climates, with thick fur coats and adaptations for feeding on rough vegetation. They lived alongside mammoths, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, and other megafauna that dominated the Pleistocene landscape. The camels, along with most other North American megafauna, went extinct at the end of the Ice Age around 11 to 12,000 years ago. But some members of the camel family had already migrated across the Bering Land Bridge into Asia, where they eventually evolved into the dromedaries and Bactrian camels we know today. At Rimrock Draw, the archaeologists uncovered fragments of camel teeth and jaw bones deep within the shelter's deposits. The species identification was clear: Camelops hesternus, an extinct Ice Age giant. But what made this discovery truly extraordinary wasn't just the presence of camel remains. It was the context. The bones weren't scattered randomly across the site, as you'd expect if an animal had simply died nearby or been dragged in by predators. Instead, they were clustered in a concentrated area, the pattern you see when an animal has been deliberately butchered and processed by humans. Closer examination revealed something even more significant. The bones bore clear-cut marks, straight parallel lines scored into the surface at joints and attachment points where meat would be separated from bone. These marks were consistent with stone tool butchery, completely different from the gnaw marks left by carnivores, or the random damage caused by weathering and erosion. The location of these cut marks was telling. They appeared exactly where you'd expect if someone was efficiently dismembering a large animal, at the joints, along the ribs, where major muscle groups attached to bone. This wasn't accidental, it was deliberate, skilled butchery. But the most significant detail came from the sediment itself. The camel remains were found beneath a thick, distinct layer of volcanic ash, the ash that sealed history. In archaeology, few discoveries are more valuable than an intact volcanic ash layer. When a volcano erupts violently, it ejects massive quantities of ash high into the atmosphere. This ash can spread across thousands of square miles, carried by high-altitude winds before settling to the ground in a relatively short period of time. Once deposited, volcanic ash creates a distinct sediment layer that can be identified across vast regions. Even better, each volcanic eruption produces ash with a unique chemical fingerprint. By analyzing the composition of microscopic glass shards within the ash, using techniques like electron microprobe analysis, scientists can identify exactly which volcano produced the ash and precisely when the eruption occurred. This process, called tephrochronology, provides archaeological sites with an undeniable chronological marker, a geological timestamp that cannot be argued away, reinterpreted, or dismissed. At Rimrock Draw, the volcanic ash layer was substantial and unmistakable. The team collected samples and sent them to specialists who analyze volcanic materials. The results came back clear. The ash was from Mount St. Helens, the active volcano in Washington state that erupted catastrophically in 1980, killing 57 people and reshaping the mountain. But this wasn't the 1980 eruption. This was a much older event known as the Set S eruption, a massive explosive eruption that occurred over 15,600 years ago. Geological studies have precisely dated this eruption using multiple independent methods. all of which confirmed the timeline. The implications were immediate and unavoidable. The camel remains at Rimrock Draw were found beneath this ash layer. That means that they had to be older than 15,600 years. The ash acts as a ceiling, a fixed point in time. Nothing beneath it can be younger than the eruption that deposited it. But how much older were the camel bones? That question required radiocarbon dating, the most reliable method for determining the age of organic remains from the last 50,000 years. Scientists carefully extracted a sample of tooth enamel from one of the camel teeth. Tooth enamel is ideal for radiocarbon dating because it's extremely durable, resistant to contamination, and preserves carbon from the animal's lifetime in a stable mineral structure. The sample was sent to a specialized laboratory equipped with an accelerator mass spectrometer, the most precise instrument for radiocarbon analysis. The results were checked and rechecked. The findings were sent to a second independent laboratory for confirmation. Both labs returned the same result. The camel tooth enamel dated to approximately 18,250 years before present. 18,000 years. More than 5,000 years earlier than the Clovis culture. More than 7,000 years before the ice-free corridor between the glaciers even opened. The number was so far outside the accepted timeline that it demanded extraordinary scrutiny. But the evidence was solid. The stratigraphic context was clear. The volcanic ash provided an independent age control, and the radiocarbon dates from two separate laboratories agreed. Humans were present in Central Oregon, hunting and butchering Ice Age megafauna 18,000 years ago. During the absolute height of the last glacial maximum, when massive ice sheets covered much of North America, and global temperatures were significantly colder than today. But the camel tooth was only the beginning of the evidence. The tools that removed all doubt. Finding animal bones with cut marks is significant, but skeptics can always raise questions. Maybe the marks were natural. Maybe they were caused by carnivores. Maybe the association between the bones and human activity is coincidental. That's why the stone tools discovered at Rimrock Draw are so critical. They remove all ambiguity. They provide direct, undeniable evidence of human presence and technological sophistication. Among the artifacts recovered from the site were finely crafted stone scrapers, tools designed specifically for processing animal hides and butchering meat. These weren't crude, hastily made implements. They were carefully shaped with sharp working edges created through controlled flaking techniques that require skill and understanding of stone fracture mechanics. What made these tools even more remarkable was the material they were made from. Orange agate, a distinctive stone prized by ancient toolmakers for its unique properties. Agate is a type of cryptocrystalline quartz that fractures conchoidally, meaning it breaks in smooth, curved patterns like glass. This fracture property allows skilled craftspeople to create edges sharper than surgical steel, ideal for cutting meat, scraping hides, and performing detailed work on organic materials. But here's the critical detail. Orange agate doesn't occur naturally anywhere near Rimrock Draw. The rock shelter is carved into basalt, a completely different type of volcanic stone. The nearest known sources of orange agate are many miles away. This means the stone had to be deliberately transported to the site. Either the people who occupied Rimrock Draw traveled long distances specifically to gather high-quality toolmaking materials, or they obtained the agate through trade networks with other groups. Both scenarios reveal something profound about these early Americans. They weren't simply wandering through the landscape, grabbing whatever stones happened to be nearby, and making crude tools for immediate survival. They were planning ahead. They were selecting the best materials for specific tasks. They understood the properties of different stones and sought out superior resources. This level of technological sophistication and forward planning suggests long-term occupation of the region, not a brief transient visit. These people knew the landscape. They knew where to find the best materials, and they returned to Rimrock Draw repeatedly over extended periods. One of these orange agate scrapers was subjected to residue analysis, a sophisticated technique that can detect ancient proteins preserved in the microscopic surface features of stone tools. When a tool is used to cut meat or scrape hide, blood and tissue fluids are forced into tiny cracks and fissures in the stone surface. These organic materials dry and become trapped, protected from bacterial decomposition and environmental degradation. Using protein immunology and chemical extraction techniques, scientists can detect and identify these ancient residues thousands of years after the tool was last used. The results at Rimrock Draw were unequivocal. Bison blood residue. The scraper had been used to butcher Bison antiquus, the massive Ice Age ancestor of modern buffalo. This species stood over 6 feet tall at the shoulder and could weigh up to 3,000 pounds. Hunting and successfully processing such an enormous animal required planning, cooperation, specialized tools, and considerable skill. The presence of bison blood residue on the tool provides direct physical evidence of human activity. Someone held this tool. Someone used it to butcher a massive Ice Age animal, and that someone was at Rimrock Draw more than 18,000 years ago. But the story gets even more remarkable. Another scraper was discovered deeper in the sediment, buried beneath additional layers of volcanic ash. According to the fundamental principle of superposition, deeper layers in undisturbed sediments are older than layers above them. This means the deeper tools predate both the camel remains and the Mount St. Helens eruption. They're older than 18,000 years. The question is, how much older? How ancient is Rimrock Draw really? The 18,250-year date from the camel tooth represents what archaeologists call a minimum age. It's the youngest the site could possibly be, not the oldest. This distinction is crucial. The date comes from an associated animal remain, not from a directly dated human artifact like charcoal from a hearth fire or organic residue adhering to a stone tool. In archaeological science, when you date something associated with human activity rather than the activity itself, you're establishing a no younger than marker. The camel was present at the site 18,250 years ago. The stone tools found beneath the camel layer in older sediments must have been deposited earlier. But how much earlier? That's the question that keeps archaeologists returning to Rimrock Draw season after season. The site hasn't been fully excavated. Funding limitations, the need to preserve portions of the site for future research with even better technology, and the painstaking nature of careful archaeological excavation mean that deeper, older layers remain untouched. Some of the archaeologists involved in the project believe the site could be significantly older than the current benchmark date. If tools continue to appear in progressively deeper layers, and if those layers can be reliably dated, the human occupation of Rimrock Draw could extend back 19, 20, or even 21,000 years. If confirmed, such dates would represent human presence in North America during a period when the climate was even harsher, when ice sheets were at their maximum extent, and when survival would have required extraordinary adaptability and resilience. But even at the current confirmed age of 18,250 years, Rimrock Draw is the oldest reliably dated human occupation site in North America. It predates the Clovis culture by more than 5,000 years. It predates the opening of the ice-free corridor by 7,000 years. And it fundamentally changes our understanding of who the first Americans were and how they got here. What Rimrock Draw means for American history. The discovery at Rimrock Draw isn't just another archaeological site with interesting artifacts. It's a paradigm shift, a fundamental challenge to the narrative that has shaped our understanding of American prehistory for over a century. The Clovis first model proposed a simple linear story. One migration event, one route through the ice-free corridor, one population spreading rapidly across two continents. It was elegant, straightforward, and wrong. Rimrock Draw proves that humans were already in North America thousands of years before the Clovis culture appeared. They were established, adapted to the environment, hunting successfully, and using sophisticated technology. The ice-free corridor hadn't opened yet, which means they must have arrived by a different route. The coastal migration hypothesis, once considered speculative,
bones that hinted at a far older human story.
Skills could have traveled down the Pacific coast, following kelp forests and rich marine resources from Asia to the Americas. This route would have been accessible even during the height of the Ice Age, when interior routes were blocked by massive glaciers. But the implications go deeper. If people were in Oregon 18,000 years ago, how long had they been on the continent before that? The Rimrock Draw occupation doesn't represent the moment of arrival. It represents a population already established, already adapted, already successful. How many separate migrations occurred? Did people arrive in multiple waves at different times from different source populations? Did they take different routes, some coastal and some interior once passages open? Were there distinct cultural groups that developed independently? Or did populations remain connected through trade networks and cultural exchange? These questions are only beginning to be explored. But one thing is certain. The story of America's first people is far older, far more complex, and far more remarkable than anyone imagined just a few decades ago. The people who occupied Rimrock Draw weren't primitive wanderers barely surviving at the edge of existence. They were intelligent, adaptable, technologically sophisticated humans who mastered one of the most challenging environments on Earth. They hunted animals weighing thousands of pounds. They crafted specialized tools from carefully selected materials. They understood their landscape well enough to return to favorable locations repeatedly over generations. They thrived during the Ice Age, and they did it thousands of years before we thought it was possible. The questions that remain. Every answer in archaeology generates new questions. Rimrock Draw has solved one mystery when humans first reached Central North America, but in doing so, it's opened countless others. Who were these people? What language did they speak? What did they believe? How did they organize their societies? We have their tools and their trash, the archaeological evidence of their daily lives, but we don't yet have their voices. Where did they come from? The coastal migration hypothesis suggests they traveled from Asia along the Pacific shoreline, but the specifics remain unclear. Did they come directly from Siberia, or were there intermediate populations in Beringia or along the coast who spent generations adapting to maritime life before moving further south? How many people were there? Was the Rimrock Draw occupation part of a larger network of sites, or was the population sparse and scattered? The difficulty of finding and excavating sites from this period makes it hard to estimate population sizes, but every new discovery suggests the early American population was larger and more widespread than previously believed. And perhaps most intriguingly, how much older might the evidence be? The current date of 18,000 years is based on the camel tooth found above the deepest artifacts. Ongoing excavations continue to probe deeper layers. Each new level has the potential to push the timeline back even further. As technology improves, new dating methods, better DNA analysis, more sophisticated residue testing, we'll be able to extract more information from these ancient sites. Future researchers may answer questions we don't yet know how to ask. But for now, Rimrock Draw stands as a testament to human resilience, adaptability, and ingenuity. A shallow rock shelter in the Oregon desert that held secrets for 18,000 years, waiting patiently for someone to finally ask the right questions. The story of America's first people is being rewritten, one discovery at a time, and we're only just beginning to understand how deep that story truly goes. What do you think about this discovery? Does it change how you view early human history in the Americas? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story as fascinating as we did, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next deep dive into the mysteries of the past. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.